Like we need a theme song.
There needs to be some sort of song, some sort of
Some
intro
sort of
song.
theme song, or we need to switch our backgrounds next time to
Yeah,
a
like
lively bar with fake bar noise,
it
that they
should
do
feel that
on.
way. A brew pub, something.
Yeah, yeah. I don't, what's a Canadian brew pub compared to an American?
Oh yeah, like it would be about it would be the same. It would be the same. We'd just have different we'd have Canadian beer. That'd be the only difference.
That's the only difference. And Canadian whiskey.
Canadian,
Or in
well,
your
Canadian whiskey.
case,
No bourbon in this case. Well, I guess I
no
have bourbon
bourbon.
in this case. That's correct.
You do have bourbon in this
Look at
case.
that. That's a
Oh,
hot
hey,
commodity.
people are coming on in. That's fantastic.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Welcome everyone. Great to see everyone hopping in.
Hello, hello. Do we want to give it like
Let's give it a second or two. We were just
60
talking about
seconds?
metric versus imperial system in terms of measurement, so seconds are the same.
America. Seconds matter.
Seconds matter. That's right. Speed.
Speed, efficiency. So, what are you drinking, Matt, while we're
I've got a
having?
bourbon here from Oklahoma, which we were talking about. Is bourbon from Oklahoma actually bourbon because it's not from Kentucky? Like champagne from Champagne, Scotch from Scotland.
Oh, I didn't
Discuss.
even think about the Scotch one. Yeah, discuss amongst yourselves. Whoever has the right answer wins a prize.
Yeah,
We
whatever the right
probably
answer
should
is.
have prizes. We'll send you some Cynet socks. Well, I'm
Well,
drinking a
excellent.
margarita.
Margarita. You got a
No
margarita in your
label,
cup
but I
there.
swear. But it is a margarita, and I have a whole beautiful jug, but all the ice is already melted. So, oh, wait, Megan, what
There
did
you
you
go, Megan.
say?
You got this going on here.
Someone who
Right.
lived in Kentucky for years, it's more about the barrels and the aging process. Okay.
Yeah. And see this distillery from
I like
Oklahoma,
that.
it still calls it bourbon, but says, hey, it's distilled and bottled in Oklahoma. So there you
I
go.
distilled and bottled. Maybe they got the barrels from Kentucky.
That could be. That could be.
Maybe it's distilled and then barrel aged in Kentucky and then shipped right back.
Whatever you have to do to call it bourbon, I guess. How are we doing here? All right. Well, we can
I think
let's
we're doing
get
good.
rolling. Let's get rolling. So I'll kick us off here. Welcome everyone. This is a monthly series that we're calling Last Call Threat Intel, and just a couple of security folks in a virtual pub. We're gonna have to work on that background, as Mackenzie was saying, but we're exploring the latest in cyber threat intelligence from our PsyOps researchers. So as we get going here, why don't you drop, if you haven't done so yet, drop just a note in the chat of where you're joining us from today. Maybe if there's a beverage that you're enjoying as well alongside of this, or if you're coming back from RSA and you need a break from all of the security chatter that you've had over the past couple of days. Welcome, if that is if you do qualify there. Uh, Waukee,
Yeah.
Indiana, nice.
I feel like it's the last day of RSA. I had a little bit of FOMO this year. I'm not gonna lie. A little bit.
Yeah,
And I've
same. I'm
been.
I'm not used to not going. Colorado Springs Rockstar Energy Drink. There you go.
Ooh,
Long
Colorado
long day.
Springs.
RSA. There we go. We have a
Oh,
couple
you're here.
representatives
All
from
right.
RSA.
It's because RSA is starting to die down now. Everyone's exhausted. They're like, where is the closest pub?
That's yeah.
London,
And London probably actually in a pub, I would imagine. It
Atlanta,
would be that
Georgia.
time of night. Atlanta, excellent.
What a good
San
group.
Diego, Liquid Death, love it. Love that brand.
Well,
It's
now I
great.
feel that no one has margarita or bourbon, but that's
Ghost
okay.
Electric Limeade. I need to understand what that looks like.
Things like an energy drink. We might need to push this an hour next time to get closer to the happy hour because it
Oh,
is.
Monterey, Mexico, welcome. Look at that. That's great.
Ooh, what great locations, y'all.
Excellent. Well, listen, we don't have formal slides here. We're putting really the focus on giving everyone here some real intelligence into what our PsyOps team is seeing. Home of the margaritas, that's right. German, that's perfect. Um, Not only do we want to give you actionable intelligence, we want to give you advice and some guidance from what we're seeing in the wild, what Mackenzie and the PsyOps team are actually seeing in the wild. And my co-bartender today is Mac Brown, VP of our PsyOps Threat Intelligence team. Mac, welcome. So you mentioned you're drinking a
Cheers.
margarita. That's in your cup
Margarita.
there.
It's not a fancy one though. It is made from a very fancy mix I bought. And Ocho tequila. I'm not allowed to use
Excellent.
labels. Maybe I wasn't allowed beep, and I can bleep that out as far
We
as the
can always
brand
we can always
goes.
bleep that out, but that's just something special for I think all the attendees. They get to know what distilleries. Awesome. Cool. So let's talk about what we've got on tap today. You're going to have a couple of bar puns definitely intended. We've got a fresh double IPA out of Eastern Europe called Diesel Vortex, right?
Ugh, double
Yeah,
IPAs.
doesn't sound great, but if you're an IPA
Sounds
fan, I am.
rough. Sounds
I would
too
try it.
hoppy.
I would
Yeah,
try it.
yeah.
A porter masquerading as an imperial stout,
Oh, Matt,
right?
your
Yeah,
dad puns are
we're
coming in
doing
handy
that.
here.
You'll get that in a second. And a de-alcoholized Persian style beer with hints of saffron and sumac called Handala. We're going to talk about that today as well. And then we're going to leave you off, of course, with some emerging styles that we're seeing, that the PsyOps team is seeing, and give you some tangible things that you can take away to bolster your defenses as we go along. And as we go along, feel free to continue to use that chat and the Q&A. As I said, Mac and I don't have any slides. We're going to go through and just, talk. It's just a bunch of people in a little security pub, and we're talking about some trends. But why don't we get into the first one? Let's crack the can on Diesel Vortex.
How
Ooh,
many
this one's
puns can you
scary.
get? I
I,
feel like
I,
I'm going to give you a quota every single time, see if you meet it, or a
so
drinking game.
this is the double IPA we talked about, right? Being from
Mm.
Eastern Europe, the Eastern Europe double IPA. Diesel Vortex. I don't know where they get these names from, but similar to double IPAs, I don't know where they get those names from either. But this is a nation state affiliated group. It's been in operation since 2022. We find this in Eastern Europe as well. Hence the name of the IPA. Primary targets. You're going to find critical infrastructure, energy, logistics. Typically, their motivations are financially powered, I suppose, but really focused on getting strategic intelligence and collecting it. They found an operation around 18 countries, and they're highly active in the EMEA region, as well as right here in North America as well. And one of the things that they're definitely known for is blending, right? Living off the land techniques with custom tooling. Mac, how have we seen Diesel Vortex types of attacks through some of the threat intelligence and psyops?
Well, they have hit the news lately with their most recent specific target of logistics and trucking companies. So specifically, people that were included were Truck Stop, Penske, pretty big ones, as you can imagine. And there's this pretty sophisticated methodology and attack chains that they use. The one thing that we've seen kind of evolve or get a rise over the years, phishing as a service platforms and phishing as a service models. So in this case, they actually were able to leverage a phishing as a service model to construct very specific spear phishing campaigns. The very first methodology they did was through dual domain deception. Essentially, they embed malicious iframes into seemingly legitimate domains or advertising domains. Researchers say that they actually had spun up 52 unique domains in relation to this attack. And then this allows attackers essentially through, I mean, if you think about an iframe from an ad perspective, right, it's a video or it's a graphic, and it creates an HTTP connection. So in many cases, this allows them to connect, or the end user, seeming unknowingly connect to another domain through that iframe. So they created, of course, a replica masquerading as a legitimate looking replica of the logistics platform
Hmm.
login portals. From there, in the login portals, they were able to do MFA bypass. So they were stealing tokens, they were stealing credentials, and they were operating those MFA codes through Telegram based groups that these
Hmm.
trucking logistic companies used. So in real time, they basically were able to gain access. Once they gained access, it was all downhill from there. They did a lot of stealing of funds. So they impacted or manipulated operation logistics and then moved funding over. So of course, monetary value there. They actually did a lot of redirecting of invoices, and of course, they exfiltrated data, including PII. So they had many avenues of getting a really good payday from this attack. But this was a really highly organized operation. Like I said, they had 52 phishing domains that they had spun up. They targeted in their phishing campaign 57,000 unique email addresses. And this is the whole model, phishing as a service, where AI enhanced models and, of course, social engineering techniques when it comes to phishing, especially if everyone does their security awareness training. They think of the improvement via these models and these platforms is because it's making it more realistic. We see a lot of these click fix, fake CAPTCHA, watering hole attacks, things that leverage malicious domains that also give the semblance of security and they look legitimate. And the same thing goes for these phishing attacks, these spear phishing campaigns. They're structured with no grammatical mistakes. They're creating domains that have just like a slight manipulation to it. So it all looks real. And then let alone the pages in the mimicking side of the logistics login platform login pages. That's really the concerning thing. So a very organized operation here. And they hit some pretty big industries or pretty big companies within the trucking industries.
So it's no longer a Nigerian prince that you need to worry about with your phishing emails. These look very legitimate, and especially the URLs that you're being redirected to. These are
Mhm.
common portals, right? Things that you normally they look
Super
legitimate.
targeted. Yeah,
And
super
yeah.
targeted. And they're known for their living off the land techniques as well. So once they gain access to the platform, I mean, it when I say it's downhill from there, it is essentially because they're using WMI, PowerShell, ways to laterally move for these environments to take their time and not make a lot of noise so that they can identify their targeted data that they need to find. And so being able to perform, I mean, actually steal funds outside of just the data exfiltration to redirect platform logistics and operations. I mean, all of the things they were doing took some time for discovery and planning once they had access. Creating new accounts, creating new group policy settings, of course, too, for persistence. I mean, once they're in, they're going to make sure that they have a foothold for a while to conduct this level of an operation.
So I gotta like I mean there's a lot here obviously. It's gonna I think how far the phishing and the malicious domains have even come from and some of these portals that look legitimate. How can we protect ourselves both at work, at home against these types of threats or even for the partners on the call, any of the MSPs that might be on the call, how do they better protect their clients against these Diesel Vortex type of threats?
I mean, the easiest one to say is outside of just have MFA, but it's like we're going into phishing resistant MFA. And I don't mean like passwordless authentication, because that's great too. But in this particular case, like the standard SMS one time code, the way that they were intercepting and relaying the codes kind of says like, we still use FIDO hardware keys, pass keys. Like that's kind of the evolution for certain, especially SCADA and OT based industries, but logistics wise, where that is how the business operates. I think focusing and transitioning these high risk users to hardware based tokens, anything to be able to create an additional level of encryption so that they can kind of really have more inherent or physical trust on them so that they aren't susceptible to some of the MFA bypass techniques that were being used. And of course, privileged access management too, like really spending the time to look at those privileged users or grouped of users that have access to these critical systems. That's going to be an obvious one. I think email security, right? When we talk about the iframes, really looking at HTML structure, like, really examining email security is a big one. We all have it, hopefully. And so that's like one small layer. I think the MFA side, really for the adversary in the middle attacks and being able to defend those is probably the more critical thing that you need to worry about.
I feel like a big piece of this as well that you kind of mentioned with talking about passwordless and talking about PAM, right? Privileged access management is the ITDR layer as well and monitoring that, making
Yes.
sure that we're looking at how can we identify scenarios of impossible travel in the event that they're actually not, they're not spoofing their IPs, but how can we manage and monitor for the lateral movement activities that might happen with those, credential exposures or credential thefts?
Well, and some of the other things that we're going to talk about today too are Persian linked beer that we're going to discuss. Uh, I think the theme around identity and trust being abused is going to be concurrent with this. Like, if you don't have ITDR and MDR like you do, you are kind of playing with fire. A lot of these initial access activities in the attack chain include MFA bypass, or in some regards, apparently, allegedly, no MFA. So, you're playing with fire if on top of it you're not actually monitoring for some of these identity abuse techniques.
Yeah, and I think it shows, as you mentioned, really the importance of having a layered defense here. It's not just the identity layer, it's also when that threat establishes persistence across systems, and even email, combining that with the signals you're getting from email and the network and the device itself, the endpoint, really critical, in addition to pairing that with the intelligence you're getting from an ITR system.
Ooh, pairing it. I feel
Pairing,
like you didn't
see?
even mean to bring
I'm,
in a
I'm
pub
your
reference, but you
sommelier in
did.
addition to your bartender, co-bartender.
It's very fruit forward when we discuss these phishing as a service models.
I've got notes of leather and leather-bound books and oak. It's excellent.
Mmm, delicious leather.
But it looks like we've come to the end of the Diesel Vortex double IPA. That one was it was an interesting one. Really really tasty. I don't know, like notes of citrus on up front and very punchy with the hops on the back end. But let's open
Yeah.
another bevy here. Let's talk about a porter style of beer that's masquerading as an imperial stout, and that's masquerading techniques, right?
Ooh,
And these
yes.
techniques, what do these do? Obviously, these are attackers in disguise. They disguise malicious files or processes as legitimate ones to bypass those security tools and what's actually trying to identify and keep those users safe. What have you seen? What have we seen? What are some examples that we maybe have recently seen of masquerading attacks in the wild?
I mean, this is super common, especially anyone that works in a SOC or, on the MDR threat operations side, is this is a really common technique to be able to, a lot of what we talk about, to be able to drop very specific, either persistence mechanisms, say a web shell or a backdoor, or specific commodity or recompiled malware like remote access Trojan, or RATs, as everyone knows of them as, info stealers, and then also in the case of ransomware droppers. This is where masquerading is a great technique. So renaming, there's multiple techniques actually within this masquerading process. So renaming executables is probably the big one that I would call out. This is something typically like, yes, ideally, a lot of technologies on the endpoint side should be picking up this, but also there's typically layers of detection engineering rules that are developed specifically for this because it's the whole intent is to evade detection. So if you have rules that look at paths specifically, yes, it's going to detect an alert on that saying, hey, why is SVC host running an app data, right? So like that type of rule would create some sort of alert and bubble up and say, we have a file. And then looking into the file, you can see it is not, in fact, a normal Windows system process that should be running. So the whole thing is to evade detection while also being able to implant malware in many cases or implant some sort of persistence. So malicious binaries are renamed, and this is basically they're renamed to trusted system tools, mention SVC host. That could be explorer.exe is a big one to help masquerade or masquerade. I love this picture. It feels like a masquerade ball. Updater.exe, right? Updating to make it look legitimate. And then also in some cases, the attackers will spoof the metadata. So the version, file information, product name, like all of that'll be spoofed too on the metadata side to really make it difficult if a human is inspecting it. And then, like I said, they're putting it under user writables like app data, the temp directory, these types of paths and locations is intended to bypass certain rules or certain detection mechanisms that would pick up an executable or a renamed file sitting in a directory that doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
it's once it's found, it's a very loud, obvious indicator. I'd say it's probably like a high fidelity level indicator at that point.
Yeah, and I think there's another element to this too. Like in addition to the renamed executables that you need to watch out for, there's masquerading situations of Google Forms abuse and
Yes.
attackers that are crafting like really convincing Google Forms pages that are maybe kind of thinking about the last attack when we were talking about Diesel Vortex. It's mimicking corporate IT portals to for login resets and to farm those credentials, or MFA verification screens and trying to bypass MFA and that token, or actually get them to send an MFA token to a different place where you might see one of these portals and the victim might receive that phishing link via email, right, from Diesel Vortex, kind of thinking about that, or maybe they get it from SMS as well. And because that domain is actually google.com, it looks legit. So the URL filtering actually doesn't do anything, right? So, and the user awareness as well. They're looking at that going, well, that's legitimate. It's google.com. It's a Google form. Looks legitimate. Where now they're directed to a portal that's masquerading as something else, and now their credentials or their sensitive data and information is harvested directly inside of that form as a response. So another one to really watch out for when we think about masquerading attacks as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of in these cases, a lot of them are picked up from a threat hunting or an incident response investigation of where, especially in the ransomware dropper cases, where it's like, well, where actually is that executable living? And say, okay, well, there we go. There's a web shell sitting in app data, or there's the actual variant that's sitting in the temp folder. And I think that's typically where they're going to pick it up, but that's why we have detection engineering rules that are very specifically curated to identify some of these techniques.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think when we think about how we turn off the taps on masquerading attacks, or we, check their ID, how do we actually check their ID? What are we looking for when we're thinking about masquerading attacks? Like, how do we defend against them?
Well, I think the biggest one, like mentioned on the living off the land, so the lull bins, the living off the land binary specifically. So certain tools that are legitimate Windows files, like certutil, that are running that aren't necessarily should maybe don't need to be running in all cases, but they're frequently hijacked in order to download or be malware executable to execute malware specifically. So I think. The biggest one there from the blocking perspective is block any software that doesn't have their code signed. That's a really good one. That's a very easy one. I think for the malicious domains and web content filtering, like we do this at Cynet, but you're able to block or alert based on threat-based domains. So if the malware is reconnecting, say a C2 is reconnecting outwardly, of course you can do some of the domain prevention as well. And then you can, I mentioned earlier on the engineering side, you can build in rules or have rules develop that alert on suspicious paths that don't make sense. For the Google one, what did we have that? Google Forms via proxy. So that was the big one is if it's masquerading as a trusted portal, maybe not even Google Forms because we see this a lot. Again, that goes back to the domain. So does your identity detection and response cross-reference specifically and correlate back to user behavior activity, so user behavior analytics, ITDR. So that's going to be probably the little cherry on top of the I'm not that's not even a drink reference, but cherry on top to the
It could be
Shirley
if it's a really
Temple.
really
It's
fancy,
Shirley
yeah,
Temple.
dessert pastry. Shirley Temple. There you go. Um, no, that's excellent. I think, yeah, that's a really good one too. When we think about how to prevent even the Google Forms, attacks there as well. It's the web content filtering. It's making sure that you can tune your detection as well to alert on those suspicious paths that you might be seeing. If it's a known domain, a threat that's a nefarious domain, that you're blocking that, and we're alerting that as soon as we see that happening across the environment. Excellent.
And I actually think we wrote up a massive blog. I don't think. I know we wrote up a massive blog. I'd rather call it a white paper at this point, all around masquerading, really detailed from our research department. I'm hoping Amy will drop that in the chat for everyone. So if you feel like you need some light reading along with whatever drink you're hopefully having later, this might be a good one for sure. And it kind of details even further of what Matt and I just described.
Yeah, could be a dirty Shirley, but we're actually just looking at the comments
Dirty
there. Yeah,
Shirley.
yeah. I need to know more about that one. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds like maybe that's, yeah, the dirty Shirley Temple. Um, so let's chat about another one here. Next, we're gonna look at the emerging style of beer that's coming over here. We're gonna pour over a de-alcoholized Persian style beer with hints of saffron and sumac called Handala.
Handala.
Handala. So let's talk a little around this one, Mackenzie. So this is an Iranian-linked faktivist group deploying the wiper malware. I almost said melperware. I don't know what that is. I'm making up terms just like faktivist here. Um,
At
we
least we're
talked
not
about
playing
this
an
earlier.
actual drinking game where this gets more and more difficult. And we put the more difficult things near the end where we're like, fake divist.
Faktivist. That's exactly it. See if you're paying attention.
Okay. Well, everyone knows what a hacktivist threat actor group, I would hope, right? This is kind of the hacktivism style where they're doing it from an ideological point to be able to, especially in geopolitical events, right? They're really targeting to in many cases they like drop propaganda on the devices. It's more disruptive, destructive, and then they steal data that they can post that is pertinent to whatever mission they have as far as taking that data. But Handala is a little bit different. And the reason why they call it a fake divist group, because I did have to go into a little bit of a rabbit hole deep dive on this. Um, we have a lot of these state sponsored groups that are under the guise of a hacktivist group, but they're ran essentially that's their persona, but they're still nation state sponsored. So they're independent, they're ideologically driven, but they're also getting healthcare through whatever governments, through plausible deniability. Is what they say. So in this case, Handala is actually ran through the Ministry of Intelligence and Security. I actually thought originally it was IRGC, but it is not. It's MOIS linked, and there's a little bit different. So I did have to do then what is the difference of the faktivist groups that are run on IRGC versus the one on MOIS? How is Handala different from some of those other state sponsored groups? Apparently, there's an entire world of this. So Handala basically they look for psychological impact, data destruction, doxing, again, destructive activities. And the psychological impact actually fits into another conversation we'll have here on the next slide in a little bit. As everyone knows, we should have made a drinking game, or if I say the word striker, I'm sure everyone at RSA is using this as an example right now, too. I can imagine
Yeah.
it's great. Versus the IRGC groups, for example, they might be more strategic espionage and infrastructure disruption. So I think when we get into talking a little bit about wiper malware, there's a good example where this is psychologically based for impact. Yeah, so their classic playbook, VPN brute force. They're looking for supply chain compromise. They've done it targeted MSPs. So to our partners on the call, this is why we are concerned about this type of attack because we consider you not just critical infrastructure, but supply chain, one to many.
Yep.
RDP for lateral movement, LSAS for cred dumps, very group policy for persistence and manipulation on login strips, but specifically to push the very traditional weaponized class of wiper malware. Matt,
And
wipers?
that's
It's
right.
like
Like that's not it's
it was like
and
a
wiper
shot name.
malware. Yeah,
Yeah.
shot like wiper malware. I like it. It should be maybe not even the
The
name of a
blackout
beer.
shot is a wiper malware
Probably.
shot
Yeah, because
for
it
sure.
deletes everything. It's your night is gone. You cannot remember anything. They don't even hold it for ransom. Yeah, this is the thing, right? Like wiper malware and wiper attacks aren't new. They've been around
Yeah.
for a while, like 15 going on since 2020, since 2012, really is when we first started seeing those. But I think recently ransomware has really gained in popularity in terms of attacks because it's for profit. You know, you're holding hostage systems, assets, data, etc. For a ransom, where wiper malware is just completely destructive. It's
Hmm.
that single shot. It's deleting everything deliberately, deleting everything that's on that system. Right? We've in 2012 there was Shamoon. We saw that target Saudi Aramco and wipe 35,000 of their workstations and create a bunch of chaos there. Not Petya was a very common one in 2017 as well. That was one where it was disguised as ransomware, but actually it overwrote master boot records across everything and went global very quickly, billions in damages. Like FedEx, all the supply chain folks there, Mondelez, Maersk, FedEx. When we think about that, and only just recently, and obviously Stryker, say that, drink, here we go. Um, but that's really been over the past couple of years, we've seen more of an inflection point and an increase in these wiper attacks because of that. And like Mac mentioned, there's no negotiation, there's no decryption key, there's no recovery path. The data is gone. And if
Yeah.
your clients, if you're an MSP on the call and your clients don't have clean, tested backups, a wiper attack is an end of the conversation, right? It's completely gone.
And I love that it's making a comeback a little bit here on the wiper weapons class because you were right. Like we're really, I don't want to say distracted because it's a booming market of the ransomware as a service model and ransomware operations. Like that hasn't slowed down. And we've seen the evolution with ransomware go from traditional, encryption and extortion to double extortion of taking the data to just taking the data, no ransomware at all. And so from a wiper is like you're looking at data is likely taken in addition to you are relying solely on your BCDR plan. Like how are we recovering? Have we tested this? Do we have immutable backups? Like what is the route that we're taking just to get restored? And I believe I was just reading the last update because we'll talk about Striker in a
Yeah.
little bit, but
Yeah.
the last update is like they have recovered, but you're talking about days to weeks to do IR and recovery to keep in mind from these types of attacks. So if you sit in a specific industry that is critical where you are having to recover overnight and restore operations, it's going to be not just overnight. It's not going to be an easy switch of a button.
Yeah, and we'll top this up on the next slide, right? We'll talk a little more about this one, specifically Striker drink. But what can folks do to defend against these types of attacks? When we think about Handala, but not just Handala, let's talk about Miper, like Miper, Miper malware,
Oh no, the wiper
wiper,
shots are kicking
wiper
in.
malware attacks in general. What do you think, folks? Like, what can folks do to prevent themselves from being affected and their organizations from being affected by these attacks?
I mean, I think the big one is okay. So, first and foremost, we've been talking about identity, right? So, we can talk about all the things you need to do from your ITDR to actually zero trust modeling, having MFA, implementing conditional access rules, going through privileged access management, just in time access. I could go down the full list of all the things and we have those written down too if you need them. And it's also when we talk about this next breach, it's looking at for MSPs because they are a target for this type of group specifically. I like to pull back the curtain and look at like what do MSPs control? They control centralized system management interfaces. So privileged access management is one component of it too, but it's also how do we harden those management interfaces and the access and what can be done. So whether it's doing like actual allow listing for IPs, doing all of the just-in-time access, MFA, conditional access policies, some of those more strong, resilient identity controls that need to happen on these types of interfaces, PSAs, RMMs, and MDMs. So how do you harden things like Intune that you're leveraging? And I mean, for Handala though, it's kind of like looking at the wiper malware. You kind of look at the classic playbook that we've talked about too. RDP for lateral movement, right? Going back to locking down RDP the same way that we recommend you locking down VPN.
Yeah.
Credential stuffing or not stuffing, sorry, credential dumping via LSAS, group policy scripts. All of these, if you have endpoint security, like these are typical EDR built-in alerts that would bubble up. So at some degree, you need to have both endpoint detection, security, either prevention or, just monitoring. And then you need to have MDR. You need to, like, it's 24/7. So if you live
Yeah.
within any of the industries that they're going to target that are critical, yeah, I'd bring it back to all the things I mentioned. PAM and looking at those centralized systems that give them the access that they need to be able to perform these types of whether deployment of wiper malware or what we'll talk about is not something that's new, but a little ingenious, if I say so myself.
Absolutely. And I think with these, it's the next attack is not going to look like the last one either. So it's really important to have
Yeah.
behavioral detection baselines in place so that you can start to spot these trends when things might happen. But you mentioned obviously the MDR, the 24/7 coverage, response coverage, detection and response coverage is so critical here too, because the next one's coming. It's not if, it's when. And we're really focused on making when small, right? You don't want the when to be big. You want small wins. Big wins Small wins.
Big win.
Big wins, small wins.
Small
Uh,
wins.
small wins. It's not if it's when. But let's get into a little bit talking about Striker. How can we avoid it? And some of the emerging threats that we're seeing. Right, Megan in the comments there dropped a great comment or served us up a great beverage as well. In the Cybersecurity Hub, did a great breakdown of around state
Yeah.
sponsored capabilities. So check that out. We also have a couple of blog posts that our PsyOps team has created recently that talk about some of these attacks that we're seeing and some of the emerging threats to watch and keep an eye on. But in addition to Handala, Mac, like what else are we seeing in terms of how the striker attack? There's obviously lots of articles that are written out there about how it happened and the account compromise. But what have we seen so far, and how has that impacted what just generally the threats that we're seeing across psyops?
I mean, you can see there's some of their most recent activity, right? They're going to be targeting critical infrastructure. More recently, in the Israeli aspect for SCADA, ICS, industrial control systems type of industries. That should be an obvious why that happens during warfare. Leaking sensitive military and government data. So, again, from an espionage perspective, because remember, when we talk about hacktivists or faketivists, they're state sponsored. So, there is significant use of any data that's critical or sensitive that can be collected in some of these espionage campaigns. And then targeting scope to some of the defense contractors or NGOs. A lot of this would be pretty normal activities that you would see for a group like this. But I think the biggest one that we've all seen is this isn't hitting, the Iran-Israel war conflict. Now we're talking about things even hitting, on the US side, because where's Stryker? Michigan, right?
Hmm. Right.
Yeah. So based in Michigan, and that's kind of where we hit on the more recent one, which is take a drink, Stryker, the Stryker breach. I think two for the striker breaches. Okay, the top of the list, the most interesting thing, and we've seen this before. I've seen this before in another case where Intune was abused. So it's another way. Again, I go back to MSPs that manage centralized systems, management interfaces, whether it's PSAs, RMMs, MDMs. What is Intune? It's an MDM. And you're really getting access to everything from the workstations to laptops to mobile phones. And you're not able to just, in this case, what Handala did or this group did on the striker breach, they can push out group policies, which is pushing out dedicated schedule workloads, in this case, wiping devices. So they used Intune to be a device wiper. And it happened quite quick. They obviously enrolled rogue devices as well to deploy other malicious policies. They allegedly, and I like to say allegedly because I feel like more information is still coming out. They claim to have taken, I think, upwards of 50 terabytes, if I recall,
Hmm.
of data. But it wasn't like just PII, which is what we see a lot, employee information specifically on the PII, but it was intellectual property, design files, logistics information. I mean, a lot of the stuff that came into what they were taking, that would be useful. And then they were able to do the full wiping campaign. So no malware was used, simply just built-in capability to Intune.
Yeah, and you mentioned too how far-reaching I think this attack is, like hitting a company that's based in Michigan, and it's not even just Stryker's corporate apps and emails that were affected. It's Stryker's employees with their own mobile devices. They're bring your own device, mobile
Yes.
devices, and those devices were enrolled in Intune as well. And overnight, like in a matter of seconds, they saw their own personal photos, their apps, their devices were factory reset overnight. So you've got your eSIMs, your authentication apps for your banks, everything gone, everything wiped. Photos, if you're storing them locally on your device and they're not backed up to the cloud, gone. And hospitals, obviously, with the industry that Stryker is in, those hospitals lost access to Stryker's LifeNet system. Paramedics had to fall back on using radio, which is insane. I mean, I was talking to my kids yesterday about how different it is now with them having devices and when I wanted to call my friends, I picked up a telephone, right? In some cases, it was rotary dial. That's how far back we're going here. But that's the
Dad, what's
damage,
a
I think.
radio?
What's a radio, Dad? Yeah, it's weird. Like completely side topic. They're all on. Hey, I want to get a CD player. I'm like, I don't understand what's happening here, but they're doing that either way. But it
It
just
was
shows
vinyl
you, right?
records a
How
bit ago, but yeah, we've
yeah,
moved to the CD
is
players
how
are now the hipster thing.
that's exactly it. And she's talking about records. I'm like, oh man, how far back do you want to go? It's going to be 8 track time pretty soon. Um,
But definitely based on the Handala thing, I mean, like go back to what we talked about was kind of their style and reputation as this group is psychological impact, psychological damage. And you think
yeah,
it's if you're a ransomware operator and you're targeting healthcare because there is a sense of urgency and the way some of these OT systems too, the way they have legacy software, the things that exist in some of these systems, I mean, going back to radio or paper files, for instance, in many cases,
yeah.
is what they have to do until they restore. So if they have the sense of urgency because they can't restore and they need assistance, it's the same motive. I mean, psychological impact for some of these types of groups of here's how easy it is to take down critical infrastructure for very critical industries.
So how like this is obviously a very complicated attack and complex attack and very targeted in this case attack as well. But something just fundamentally from a protection perspective, how can folks protect themselves? Megan obviously has hashtag why I will never use BYOD, which makes total sense. But also, what are some protection defense mechanisms that folks can put in place to guard against this type of attack or make the if and when make the when smaller?
I think the biggest thing, well, two big things, right? So like you see the CISA advisory that came out last Thursday. We included some additional guidance on hardening practices in our blogs and other advisories around this breach too. That's specific to Microsoft Intune guidance. The user behavior analytics, the conditional access capabilities, restrictions to devices, IPs, restrictions to enrollment permissions. I mean, all the things that included with Intune that need to be hardened. And then you have that layer again for identity detection and response, right? Privileged access management and actually looking at who has access. So going through a full audit of who has the capability, global admin or not, to be able to conduct some of these activities internally for these types of systems that make impact.
Check out, do an audit of your service accounts, your service credentials. Like that's what happened here in this case. It was a single compromised admin credential, and they were able to gain access to Intune and use it for what it was intended to do, right? But obviously in a very nefarious manner.
Yeah, and then the other thing was like the abnormal user behavior analytics, right? Abnormal user behavior in general. So adding little things that do get alerted, sometimes get alerted or they get audited and will create an audit log are like users being added to sensitive admin roles too. So any sort of new account creations or users being added to different administrative groups like Intune. I don't know what it's called, so forgive me. It's been a
Mhm.
while since I've touched Intune, but Intune, and like Intune administrator, I believe is its own specific type of role that exists within Azure. So it's a lot of these changes that you can set alerts on, and that's a part of the ITDRs. Changes in some of the administrative privileges, and then also things like impossible travel, right? Some of those will be picked up and indicate that this account is not coming from what would be considered a normal travel type of destination between
Yep.
IPs. So I think that
Yeah.
covers most of what you can do in regards to this type of attack.
Yeah, yeah, obviously, and pairing that, making sure that you're pairing your ITDR system with visibility across the environment too, so that you can spot these trends and the differences in behavior, like UABA, as you kind of mentioned, but also MDR is really important here too, to
Yeah.
making sure that you have that as part of the protection piece for not only the cloud but your identity layer. If you don't have that in place, really like you're playing with fire with detection and prevention, right? In
And
that case,
allegedly, the administrative account didn't have MFA in the
huh?
Striker breach.
So enable MFA across all your service accounts
I
and admin accounts. You can do that now. It's easy.
Cheers, do it right now, please, if you haven't done it already. I want to say allegedly because I've heard two different stories in regards to like outside of just how did they get in, they gained administrative an administrative account compromise. But then I've also heard there was no MFA on that. So, forgive me, but yes, some of those basics are still foundationally not being done.
It's path of least resistance. That's what always is going to happen here in these cases. It's what can I access? How can I leverage stolen credentials? What can I do?
Right. And you might not think, I think when it comes to misconceptions around threat intel or things that hit the media, these types of a groups like, well, why would they target my organization? I think these are all lessons learned in general, especially as they're still getting kind of investigated, because this has been a cat and mouse game as well. It's just a lessons learned on like, well, from this one story or this one breach, what was their impact? And this was not, it was sophisticated, but it's kind of like why work harder when you could just work smarter type of approach. And
Exactly.
that's what's more concerning. Threat actors, the same reason they live off the land, like less noise, more evasion techniques. It's much easier. They can conduct their actions on objectives much quicker. So, and be just as disruptive.
So I like that. Let's maybe kind of wrap this up a little bit and thinking about the defense playbook. Not to sober everyone up, but really thinking about a protection. So you don't wake up the next morning after an attack with a massive hangover. So let's think about how we can defend. Um, you take some vitamin C, whatever it happens to be, but defending against these attacks that we mentioned. We mentioned the double IPA from Eastern Europe, the Diesel Vortex. Um,
I love that.
it's all jokes,
Well,
all
the
dad
big
jokes
thing
all the
with
time.
them is, right, we talked about the phishing as a service platform or model that they use, living off the land techniques, right? So when they say deploy EDR to do behavioral detection activities, especially for fileless threats, use of PowerShell, WMI, like any sort of living off the lil bin or lil bass, a whole list of those. EDR does alert on those. So most of the top main EDRs in the market will alert on that. And, dare I say, if you don't have EDR, have EDR, but you'd be shocked if we're still talking about MFA. So I'd say make sure you deploy EDR, have EDR, and have visibility and coverage of it as well. But it will have alerts that are created specifically around suspicious living off the land attempts for use of PowerShell. And there's also some hardening you can do around PowerShell too. But frankly, I think just having some sort of detection mechanism is most important. And right, the Diesel Vortex, I mean, gosh, it could kind of go hand in hand with some of the striker breach
Yeah.
conversation, enforcing MFA and privileged access management. Really doing an audit of who your privileged users are, what they have access to, specific systems that are considered tier zero systems that maybe you want to do even more of a role-based access definition to. Disable NTLM. We talk about this, which again, I'm shocked people don't do it, but there's still SMBv1 not disabled out there. So, yeah, those are kind of like the easy hitters as well. I, I think we talked about some of this, like the DNS filtering
Yeah.
too, right? They spun up 52 unique domains. Look up newly registered domains. If there's no historical context to it, it's probably bad. So having tools that look for that and scan for that. Another persistence technique, right? Scheduled task, registry run key changes. These are things that get picked up by your SIEM or by your 24/7 MDR service. They're going to be looking for that as well.
Yeah. And I feel like with all these, you mentioned it too, there's a common thread for me, and well, there's a couple of things really. First is the identity layer. All of these have a common thread around
Yes.
identity. So ITDR is really a common piece. And I think it's about the paths, right? Managing the attack path itself, not the independent
Hmm.
layer or vector. It's around having that unified visibility across the entire environment so that you can spot these things earlier, right? If you're just looking at identity, that's all you're going to see. You won't see the endpoint, you won't
Right.
see email, you won't see the network gaining persistence using a VPN, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important, and I think something to take away is to make sure that you've got unified visibility across the entire, attack path. That's really where, for me, this comes into play as well. It's not just a single layer; these are multi-threaded attacks.
And some of these are, you look at some of these initial access ones that we've talked about or identity-based detections that are kind of obvious, but it is really the behavioral detections between the living off the land and it was we were talking about with masquerading attacks. Suspicious or malicious files being embedded or not embedded's the wrong word, but being dropped under normal Windows file names. Oh, where did it go?
Yeah.
And then running in not normal paths and directories. I mean, like that kind of requires behavioral based monitoring and detection. And so, like the reason why I have the theme for this is because they're looking for less noisy ways to evade normal security controls. And so, what can you do that? A normal behavior from an identity perspective and from the system perspective. So, like you said, managing attack paths, the behavior changes. They can shift their path at any point and whatever vector they're utilizing.
And I feel like that's consistent, even when we think about the defensive playbook for hardening against wiper attacks and a lot of
Yeah.
the mobile device management and that Intune attack as well that we have seen. It's enforcing MFA, right? It kind of unreal to even think that MFA would have been not in use or not enabled on a admin account, but start there. If you're going to
Yeah.
start anywhere from a defense perspective, is just make sure you've got multi-factor authentication enabled across your service, your admin accounts, like critically important. Device enrollment, you talked about it, is looking at making sure that's available to authorized users. So your privileged access management, role-based access control, those types of approaches in terms of being able to defend that layer are really important. And also looking at that for managed devices only, and making sure that you can do that. Anything else that we maybe didn't cover on hardening against some of those Handala based wiper attacks and the striker types of attacks that we had gone through? Obviously, the admin and the role based access pretty important, but any other thoughts you have there?
No, I mean, I think it goes back to the fileless threats. It goes back to the use of legitimate services and platforms like Intune, like your RMM, if you're an MSP. I mean, they're looking for management interfaces. It doesn't necessarily detect, it isn't bubbling up any sort of alert. It's not something that's going to be considered abnormal. So you have the identity side where you need to protect those administrative accounts and how they're protected and leveraged by the end user who has them, as well as looking at the overall coverage of the tools that you have to detect some of these living off the land techniques. I think it goes back to looking at when there was the trend in ransomware where they just use BitLocker. And so we just have to consider like we are the administrators of our environment and we have these very privileged roles and we have these tools that are supposed to give us more operational efficiency. They're supposed to be able to give us this semblance of security in the same way that they can also be turned around and used maliciously. So I think that's a key that's kind of across all of these are like, what are the less noisy, more silent threats that don't create high fidelity alerts?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm looking around the bar here and I'm seeing that they're starting to put the chairs on top of the tables here. So I think that's our cue and the lights are coming on as well. It's getting a bit bright in here. That's a signal. Maybe what we'll do is we'll start to wrap there. Everyone that joined want to thank you for joining obviously our last call threat intelligence webinar. We will be doing these monthly. Amy in the chat actually gave a link to the report, the next month's threat intelligence report that we have available there. And you can also check out our stories from the SOC newsletter. This is something that we produce monthly. It's a LinkedIn newsletter. There's almost 9,200 subscribers, so a lot of folks that are consuming that content. Really great stories from Mackenzie's team here. And Mac, the Echo report. This is something new for us as well, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
love
So
we
the
love our
Echo
acronyms.
report.
We love our
Yeah, and we'll
acronyms with
be
Echo.
examination of cyber hostility. Gosh darn it. Wiper malware. It's the wiper. It's the wiper shot is getting to me. Hostility in operations. We're going to be doing these every 6 months, and it's basically a recap of the landscape. So, a lot of what you'll see in the Echo report is what we saw in 2025. Trends around AI used both proactively by business owners and also maliciously by threat actors. We cover some of the campaign trends, VPN compromise, fake CAPTCHA, click fix. We take a few of the incident response investigation stories that we have to kind of give a new viewpoint or point of view, I guess. from the IR perspective of these types of attacks that we're seeing, like Teams abuse, the Teams vishing stuff. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn too. I mean, PsyOps, we really have pushed out a couple new blogs, like we mentioned, the Masquerading one, some specific around the Striker breach and Handala and wiper malware. So we have those advisories out, and there was one more we just released on Teams vishing. So we are seeing an uptick in the trends. It is discussed in the Echo report too of Teams abuse, Teams, some of these platforms being used for social engineering attempts. So all that fear,
Excellent.
uncertainty, and doubt.
And this is all great. Obviously, Amy's put the links to some of those in the chat there, but I am hearing Semisonic come on the speakers here.
Oh my
I
gosh.
think I feel like that's our cue.
Yeah, my
Uh,
Uber's almost here. I gotta go, Matt. My Uber's
Uber's a couple
outside.
minutes away. Want to thank everybody for joining us again for the first of the Threat Intelligence Last Call Threat Intelligence webinar. I'm Matt Duench and Mac. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for
Bye,
having me.
everyone.
Looking forward to next month. Bye,
Woo!
all.